Today on Our Community, we're talking with Congressman Tim Walberg from the 7th District. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you again.
Today we're going to talk about the Affordable Health Care Act. And as we talk about that, there are so many controversies out there. And the biggest one is, I've lost my insurance. Now when I go on the website or I fill out the forms, now all of a sudden, they're making me take certain aspects of insurance I don't need. My costs are going up. Where are we at with the Affordable Care Act?
Well, we're in a great quandary right now because, as then Speaker Pelosi said, we have to pass it in order to find out what's in it. We are finding out what's in it day by day.
But let me stop you right there. Isn't that kind of it's really not the right way to go. Let's pass it and then see what's in it. I just find that sort of appalling.
Well, that's why it was passed under duress with no Republican support in either house. Wasn't desired. They rammed it through with only Democrat votes. A few Democrats voted against it, but they got, I think, 7 votes over what they absolutely needed in the House to pass it. They even changed the constitutional framework of how you pass a bill. They did it through the Senate first because they couldn't get the House to pass it at the time. So they altered a bill and put the language in so they could go from the Senate and bring it back. They even deemed certain things passed, which we've never heard of before. So it was done really under the cloak of darkness, and it was pressed through, and now we are truly finding out what's in it. And what's in it is not only wrong, but it's hurtful. I tell people, don't spend too much time worrying and fixating on the website. That, I think, eventually, at least it should, be fixed. Sure. The product is the problem. And so when we have committee hearings in Oversight and Government Reform Committee, for instance, in which I sit, looking at all aspects of the promises of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, the President's Health Care Plan, whatever you want to call it, we're finding mechanisms that should have been placed that aren't there, and we're finding mechanisms that are being used that there's no legal authorization for them. But ultimately we're finding a system in place that is not going to meet the needs of people and that will not fulfill the promises. Not simply the promise if you like your doctor or your health care plan, you can keep it. We're finding that's untrue. The majority of people are going to lose their health care plan. And they're going to receive the opportunity for health care plans that are doubled. I just met with a businessman here in Coldwater who saw his plan over double. And he's expecting, and he was asking me the question, next year will it go up again? And I had to say to them, most likely it will.
But doesn't most insurance go up year to year anyway?
Not double.
Okay.
The average, what we've seen so far in the first, 9 weeks of implementation since October, or 7 weeks of implementation, we've seen an average 30% increase in the insurance policies. We're talking about people that are making, last night I was talking to a restaurant owner. And I said, after some niceties and talking, I said, how's business? He says, terrible. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He says, within 2 weeks after the roll-in of Obamacare, we saw a marked drop-off in our patrons. And he said, it's all up and down this strip, and it was a particular strip in my district that has a lot of restaurants. He says it's common across all of us on this strip. And I'm talking with people at my bar, and they're saying, the reason why we aren't coming as much anymore is because our insurance policy's gone up, and it's a choice between paying our insurance and paying our car payments and planning maybe for a vacation, and then deciding that certain expendable things like eating out, like we used to do, is off the table. So the impact there, not only in healthcare, but in the economy, is having a huge impact. People are going to make decisions. And then the young people that were supposed to pick up really the cost of all of this, the millennials, they're not enrolling. Either they don't understand they have to, or they're looking at the cost and saying, wait a second, I was paying for a comprehensive plan, a catastrophic plan before, just covered in case of some catastrophic loss. I'm a healthy guy or healthy gal. I don't need this. And now I'm required to buy all of this. I don't want to do that.
Well, and are they going to just pay the penalty at that point in time?
They'll pay the penalty, or in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, they may pull out their cell phone and say, get me the insurance agent, have Siri tell them where the insurance, enroll me. And really that's how this plan was put in place, that they could do that and get away with it and not even have the penalty.
So what is the alternative solution?
There is an alternative. It's an alternative. I introduced the legislation back in 2008, my first term in office. Speaker Pelosi, then Speaker Pelosi, wouldn't even take it up for a hearing in committee. It was a patient-centered approach that now has been expanded on, I think made better, and I've co-sponsored that legislation that a good friend of mine from Tennessee, Dr. Dr. Rowe has put in place that says several things. One, let's expand health savings accounts so people become consumers of health care. Expand their flexibility, their size, their scope. Let's allow associated health plans, those plans where small businesses can join together for economy of scale like the big three and purchase health care at a reduced cost for their employees because they have more employees under the plan than just one business. We don't allow that now. We ought to. That looks at the issue of purchasing health care with greater competition across state lines. We don't allow across state lines purchase now. We do it in other insurances. Why not health care? I mean, you could have competition between, let's say, the Blues of Michigan and Blues of North Carolina, and there is a difference. You could also have entrepreneurs develop because of that who, let's say Warren Buffett says, I feel sorry for those people with autism in their family. They have a hard time getting any insurance plan now that's reasonable, that they can afford, that meets their needs because they can only work from a small base of autism patients in Michigan. But now I got 50 states. I could make a profit for myself with a niche industry, and I could provide a reduced cost service to people with autism. That ought to be done. We ought to deal with meaningful reform of frivolous lawsuit. Tort reform that took place in Michigan almost 20 years ago now, when I was in a state house, that put a cap on non-economic damages to discourage frivolous lawsuits, lawsuits looking for a place to happen. We ought to do that nationwide as well. And then something that I didn't have in my original bill that I think is very positive, that's giving expanded authorities to states to develop high-risk pools. So those people who literally cannot find insurance will be able to find it through those pools, and we all kick in to help them for that. Those simple changes and a few other things would go a long way with no mandates, with increased competition, with truly reduced costs as a result of that. We've shown that across the whole free market private enterprise system, that when competition ensues, we have reduced cost and better quality. And so that's our alternative. If we ever have a chance to do it, after repealing, we can replace Obamacare with something that'll work.
We're talking with Congressman Tim Walberg about the Affordable Care Act. We'll have more coming up with him after this. Back here in our community, today our guest again is Congressman Tim Walberg, and we continue talking about the Affordable Care Act. And, as we talked about the alternatives, there's a lot of people out there, well, this is law, this is the way it's going to be, give it 3 years, give it 5 years, it's all going to take effect and it'll all smooth itself out. Do you see that?
I don't see that. I see the fact, Tim, that we have this president for 3 more years. President Obama is not going to repeal his signature law. What I see him doing and what I fear is that as this rolls out and becomes more cumbersome, more burdensome, and actually doesn't accomplish what was promised to us, that he ultimately says, I've always wanted, and I've not lied to you, that I think that a single-payer system is the way to go. And some of the leaders in Congress, like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and my Vice President Joe Biden, have said the same thing, that we really need a single-payer system. And so rather than messing around with this anymore, trying to get the website right, get the insurance cost right, get the millennials to join up, we're just going to go to a single-payer system that is a total government-run healthcare system. That's my fear. I hope it's unfounded. But in the meantime, I think we need to do 2 things: push back and drag our feet, to allow people the opportunity to truly see what this is. And then the strength of America has always been found in its people asking for redress of its government on things that they've come to say, this should not be part of our American system. And that comes in the next election, with the Senate up for election and the potential of changing the makeup of the Senate, to give us at least the opportunity that we had under Bill Clinton, where you had a House and Senate that was Republican and a Democrat in the White House. Bill Clinton wisely saw the indication of the people about spending, and he saw the indication of the people about welfare reform, and ultimately he moved to the center, and he moved toward the Republicans and said, okay, I'll sign those bills. And Bill Clinton became one of the least spending presidents since Reagan. And this could be the same with Obama. If we had the opportunity to say, Mr. Obama, this isn't working. For the benefit of the American people, for people like the business in Coldwater that supplied insurance, total insurance, 100% for the employees, for the existence of their company, and want to continue doing that, but they have been already told, and I say this because I sat in a meeting with their insurance agent, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and their management team, looking at the figures that they were being given of the increased cost that it was going to be, not only when Obamacare fully kicked in for that business, but this year, and just trying to keep within lines of what Blue Cross Blue Shield feels they need to do in order to meet the challenges. It was putting them to the point where they were going to have to tell their employees potentially, we can't provide insurance for you anymore. Or that leukemia patient in my district, 29 years of age, who has been dealing with her leukemia situation for 5 years with a medication that's an oral chemo that has been successfully keeping her cancer at bay. And now she has been told she can no longer have coverage payment for that medication.
But isn't the Affordable Care Act supposed to take care of people like that with pre-existing conditions so that they don't get bumped out of the insurance system?
That's what they said, but it's not true. And the pre-existing conditions has not been covered now for 6 months since it was implemented earlier, and the roll-in of full Obamacare was taking place. It is just unaffordable, the way it's being done, as opposed to going to a patient-centered approach that lets the doctor or the medical provider and the patient be the two primary people making decisions in the process, and then have the competition of expanded cost-covering program, whether it be insurance companies or Medi-Share type programs, co-ops, you name it, that can be developed, and in fact not be developed, but expanded. They're already in place to take care of the best medical care available in the world right here in the United States.
You know what I find interesting? I was at an economic summit just recently here in Branch County, and one of the graphs that were up is that in the United States, we spend more than any other country on healthcare, yet we don't live as long. And so when you take a look at that, okay, well, if I spend more money, I should live longer, have a better life, but that's not necessarily the case. And you know, with this Affordable Care Act, I think there's some ideals in there that people are looking at and saying, oh well, again, I go back to the pre-existing conditions, but then I go to the other side where people are getting turned down. I had talked to somebody the other day about weight. Well, I filled it all out and I put my weight, and it was like, you're unhealthy. You'll have to just do this again.
And so the navigator may have said to him, we're finding out, might have said, lie about your weight.
Right.
Or lie about
well,
your
that's what I said, well, how are they going to come and say, well, you weigh this amount?
Lie about your smoking habits. The one thing we need to do, we need to encourage healthy lifestyles. And I think that's something in the plan the Republicans put together, the incentives for preventative maintenance of one's physical health. We need to do that. But I think also looking at those statistics, remember most other countries don't include all of their health problems and even deaths in their statistics. We do. Mm-hmm. We do everything because we have a full-blown reporting system in place. Again, we can do better. We can deal with the obesity problem in our society. But again, choice and competition and incentives will go a much farther way than this mandatory program that does things that our Constitution never envisioned. And remember, the Supreme Court didn't rule on the constitutionality. They ruled on whether it was a tax or not. And Justice Roberts and the majority said it was a tax. And I think we need to remember that there are better ways of dealing with health care by giving people choice, giving competition, giving the opportunity for creative entrepreneurialism that goes on within the healthcare fields, whether it's autism or whatever else. whereby we expand the opportunities for people to make those best choices for themselves and then be accountable for making those choices. You know, for a young, unmarried 25-year-old or 29-year-old guy to be required to pay for maternity insurance, what sense does that make? What additional costs does that put in a system that's unnecessary for him?
Well, and some will come back and say, yes, but we're spreading the cost across all people, all ages, and that's really what we want to do. We want to reduce the cost, because what about that young woman who can't afford prenatal care or whatever? This is going to help, because this guy over here is going to help pay for that.
Well, let's do it with competition and expand to 50 states as opposed to just the state of Michigan or the state of Ohio. Let's expand it. I mean, if you look at the rates that you would pay in some of the insurance companies that we pay for in Michigan versus what I could get. For instance, at 62 years of age, I'm concerned about the senior issues more so. I can find more creative solutions in insurance from Nevada and Utah than I can find from Michigan.
It must be ideal to have like a cafeteria system. Okay, I'll have this, I'll have this, I'll have this. Well, and there's some insurance companies in the car industry that are doing that. What would you like? And then that's what you're going to pay for.
My wife and I don't need a maternity insurance coverage. Oncology, those type of things, yes. I've purchased long-term health care insurance because it's a wise thing to do at my age. I could, who knows, I could be in for Alzheimer's or whatever for an extended stay. I want to make sure that somebody else doesn't have to take care of me, but I've done my homework to take care of myself down the road, and my family's not put in real burden because of that. These are things that we ought to be able to make choices, and with education and with competition that will come with a broadened healthcare payment system. Because remember that what was broken in our system was the payment system. It was too costly. Why do a complete shake-up and makeover of healthcare itself when in fact it was just the cost that we needed to do? So if we go to a non-mandatory but an incentive-driven, competition-based approach that expands the boundaries of healthcare payments, I think we go a much farther way than saying everybody has to have the same level of care unless we're going to penalize you.
Let me ask you this, though. Is that reality at this point in time with the law in place right now? Are we going to have to live with this for the next year, 3 years, whatever the case may be?
I think we're going to have to live with it for at least the next year. If indeed the Senate were to be changed in makeup and a working majority in place, whether it was still a Democrat Senate or not, if it was a working majority that said, hey, we've listened to the people, they're frustrated, they want changes, and so we are going to work together to say to Mr. President, don't care whether it's been renamed to be the Obamacare plan or the President's Health Care Plan or the Affordable Care Act or the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, it ain't working. Forgive my bad grammar there. But it is not working, and we're going to have to make it work. And what's it going to take? And I'm willing to be part of that solution in a bipartisan way as necessary to make a system that meets the needs of our country but keeps the freedom of choice, the competition that's there, and the private sector involvement as opposed to the government sector getting in and saying, this is what you'll have, whether you like it or not, you're going to accept it. And that's where we're at right now, Tim.
All right. Talking with Congressman Tim Walberg about the Affordable Care Act. Congressman, thanks for being with us today.
Always good to be with you.
All right. You're watching Our Community from Q1 Broadcasting.